Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at how you can get help in Python and how you can give help to others. And one of the big things behind this is docstrings. So the rationale behind Python and docstrings is that you have this universal convention, and it makes it clear for everyone and encourages good habits rather than bad ones. And that's what Python aims to do. So what actually are docstrings? Well, a docstring is a string literal that occurs as the first statement in a module, function, class, or method definition. So it's a way of explaining what's happening inside a function or a module or a class or a method. And it means if someone else is using your code, they know what's happening. And then it says, to make things consistent, you're going to use triple quotes, R if there are any backslashes, and if you're using Unicode characters, because you want special characters, you need a U at the start. And there are two forms, one-liners and multi-line docstrings. So one-liners, they're for really obvious cases and they fit on one line. And that's if you're doing something that's very simple and you don't need to write a long explanation about what's happening. So you use triple quotes even though it fits on one line so that you can expand it later. The closing quotes are on the same line, and this does look a lot better. There's no blank line before or after, so you put it right at the top, and it's a phrase that ends in a full stop. So it could be a command. Don't write it as a kind of, this is what happens. Multi-line docstrings, they are a summary of a line, so it's just a one-line docstring and then more detailed description. But before we look at docstrings, let's first look at help. So we'll just start by running help print. And you can see it says print help on the built-in print-in module built-ins. And you can see it says this is how it works, and then it prints the values to a stream or the system.standout if you're using not using stream. And then you can have these optional keyword arguments and it explains what they do. So why don't we write our own class, and we can also get help on other things. So if we get help on list, so you see differently with the list, it's on multiple lines and it's so long actually that you have to scroll down to view it all. And we're not going to view the whole thing, but if you press Q, then it just exits. And you see the print was very short, the list was a lot longer. But that's kind of because it's a class, and so you need all these methods to be described. So we're going to define our own class and use that to write some docstrings. And we'll give it an init method. So if we start by writing the init method docstring, it's just going to be initialize helper. And that's all it does. And for the helper, we'll put a multi-line docstring. So it'll be demonstrate docstrings. And then we put a space, and then we say call helper to see this message, and then we put a line at the end and finish it. And of course both of these need to end in full stops, so we'll put those there. So now that we've got this helper class, we can just call helper and run it, and you see it explains that everything that's happening. And we can even call help on helper.init. And you can see this tells us that it will initialize the helper. The other thing we can do is we can define a function. And what we can make this function do is just do a function. So we'll say that it will do func. So if we take in an argument self, because it's class x, and a func, then we can just return func of x. And to do this, we'll need a class, we'll need an instance, so we can just make this a static method instead. And we can get help on helper.function, of course. And you can see it says here, do func. Although obviously to make this in line we need to add capital D and a full stop. However, what we could actually do is say that this x has got to be an integer and that this function will return a boolean, so we say it goes to bool. And so we're actually going to return bool of func x. And so you can see it, this x is an int and it returns a bool, comes up here. But what if we want to specify that this function is a specific type of function? Well, what we can do is we can say from typing we can import callable, and there are lots of other ones you can use, but we're just going to look at callable. So we need you to return a callable. So you can see function must be callable, we must be able to call it. And we can be even more specific, we can say that the data types must be an int, because x is an integer, and it must return bool. And so if we put more arguments here, then we're saying that it takes in more arguments, and here we're saying that it returns bool. And so now you can see it modifies it here to say that we want a callable that has an integer as an argument and returns a boolean. And this means anyone using your code can find that really easily. One issue with this though, this specific type of documentation, is if we say helper.function and we call it, and we don't actually need the self because it's a static method, and we call it with x, which is hello, and a function which is the length, you see that this is not an integer and this is not a callable that matches this. And we can just print that, of course, to see that it's doing something. You'll see that it returns true. So even though we've got this specific part in our documentation, you are still able to overwrite it. And this is because the idea is that in Python, you should know what you're doing. And unlike other languages where it will break if you try doing this, it's saying that Python doesn't need to do that. The developer should know that if it's telling you to put in an integer, you should just put in an integer. And if you do something else, it's not going to make sure that it's working perfectly. So you can see that doc strings are very useful. They allow you to create methods that are very clear. Obviously, if we handed this to someone, this do func might be a bit vague. So we could say return boolean of func of x to make it clear to whoever's using it. But you can see that there are all of these different methods. Also, interestingly, we didn't need a pass here because we've got this doc string, but the doc strings are very useful and make it extremely clear to other people how to use your code. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, you've learnt a few things, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.